A large pandal tent stood in the center of the tent, and a small tent rear served as kitchen. Immediately surrounding the small compound were rice fields. The ground therefore was quite wet, and the wet fields spread a large mist. Conditions were primitive, but many of these devotees were the same disciples who had travelled with Prabhupada for a year and a half, sometimes living in Dharamshala, bare rooms, and sometimes living in cold tents. The devotees had not come to Mayapur to be functional to serve Prabhupada. In future years, by the results of their efforts, many devotees will be able to gather comfortably in Mayapur in the spacious. Well aware that Westerners were unaccustomed to austerity in India, Prabhupada wanted to provide facilities so that his disciples could feel comfortable and be able to focus their stay in India. Therefore, he was pushing to help real estate, airport, running water, electricity. Prabhupada's dwelling, simple thatched Bengali house, about 12 feet square with a thin partition divided the main room from the surface. In the front was a small veranda, and in the back a garden where Prabhupada could sit and take naps. Also in the back was a hand pump for bathing and out. When the devotees apologized for offering Prabhupada such a humble residence, he replied that he liked the natural. Even if you build me the biggest palace, I would still. While living so simply in Mayapur, Prabhupada spoke of the vision of a grand project yet to come. Although the deities of Radha Madhava, whom he had installed at the 1971 Arga Mela in Allahabad, were installed in a tent, he spoke of a marble palace. He also spoke of first-class accommodation, although as yet he had little to offer. Living simply and happily in a thatched hut, he gathered his disciples together and told them of his plan. At his request, devotees had built a small model of the proposed first major building, and there were also drawings of the proposed temple of human understanding. He wanted to build a Maya city with quarters for each of the four and see coming to has come to life and is still. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing with the fifth, the 19, the island of Jambudvip, text 20. As you can see from the board, this is prose verse, and I don't want to destroy the beautiful Sanskrit language, so I'm just. Yeah, anyone who, after that, Bhagavati, and the Supreme Personality of God, Sarvabhuta Atmani, the super soul of all living entities, Natmye, having no attachment, Anirupte, who is beyond the mind and speech, Anilayane, not dependent on anything, Parama Atmani, unto the Supreme Vasudeva, Lord Vasudeva, Son of Nanya, without any other nimitta, Pause. Bhakti Yoga Lakshana. Having symptoms of pure devotion. Nagati. Of varied destiny. Imita. The pause. Avidya Granthi. The bondage of ignorance. Gandhana. Of cutting. Varena. By means. Yata. With. Indeed. Mahapurusha. Of the Supreme Personality of God. Purusha. With the God. Satanga. An intimate relationship. Translation and purport. Translation. After many, many births, when the result of one's highest activities mature, one gets an opportunity to associate. Then one is able to cut the knot of bondage which bound him because of grief. As a result of associating with devotees, one gradually renders service to Lord Bhava, who is transcendental, free from attachment to the material world, beyond the mind and work, and independent of everything else. That Bhakti Yoga, devotional service to Bhava, is the real path of liberation. So, Brahman realization is the beginning of realization, and Paramatma realization will further advance us toward the realm of liberation. But one achieves real liberation when he understands his position as an eternal servant in the Muktir Hit Bandharu. In the material world, in the bodily context, everyone is working. When one becomes Brahma Bhuta, spiritually realized, one understands that he is not the body, and that working in the bodily concept of life is skillful and misdirected. Then his devotional service. Krishna says in Bhagavad Brahma Bhuta Samasarveshwar, one who is thus transcendently realizes the supreme Brahman and becomes, he never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service. Devotional service is actual liberation. When one is attracted by beauty, and his mind is always engaged with devotion, he is no longer interested in subjects that do not help him in self-realization. In other words, he loses all attraction from the in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2:7 says, Esha Kedan Dayati Yada Asmi Nadvishye Nakye Anirupte Nilayana Ayam Satishtam Vipati Ayam. A living entity becomes established in spiritual bliss when he fully understands that his happiness depends on spiritual self, which is the basis principle of Anand bliss, when he is eternally situated in the service of the Lord, who has no other cause above him. Om Jnana Niram Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama. We're hearing Narada Muni speak, and he is speaking mantras, prayers, the final verse from And as we know, Narada Muni, he holds a very unique position in the Lord's pastimes and wherever he desires, his Lord is playing on his chants. And Narada Muni's mood is always to assist Lord in his to free the conditions of bond. So we see Narada Muni plays an interesting part in so many ways. And we're hearing from about Bhakti Yoga. What is real liberation? Real liberation within Bhakti Yoga, devotion to the Lord's life, is part of real liberation. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada begins by explaining Brahman, Karma. So we have these three phases of spiritual life. And in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have this verse, Vadanti tat tat tatsam that learned transcendentalists who know the absolute call this non-dual substance, Brahman, Paramatma. It's non-dual because everything is emanating from Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada, he often explains Brahman, Paramatma, terms. So Prabhupada uses the sun. We have the sun glow, sun. Then we have the surface of the sun's disk. Then we have the sun's ray. Now, we cannot separate any of these three things. They all go together. You can't just take the sun's rays and not have the sun's glow, or not have the surface of the sun. We can't take any of these three away. So in one sense, they are the same. But in another sense, there is different. The rays, they give you a partial experience of the power of the sun disk, the surface of the planet. It's getting much closer. But then to be able to enter into sun planet to understand is full realization. Everything's coming from it. So we have that example in terms of Brahman realization, which is spiritual realization. The realization that I'm not listening to God. I'm spirit soul. We have this realization. And then it increases. This realization increases to Paramatma realization. The realization of the Lord situated within the heart of every single living entity. Now, going from Brahman realization to Paramatma realization, we begin to learn there's a difference between the Supreme Lord and myself. Everything is not just spirit, there is a Supreme Spirit. And that Supreme Spirit, Paramatma, is situated in every single entity. And then that realization increases to Bhagavan. The realization of personality, personhood. That Krishna, the source of everything, is person. He has like, he has dislike, he has pastime, he has individuality. And this realization of Krishna as Bhagavan as devotees, we are striving for Bhagavan. Prabhupada is always pushing towards realization of, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, everything is coming from him. Everything is emanating. All the spiritual, all the material, everything is emanating from Krishna. And that the wise who perfectly understand this, when we understand everything is coming from Krishna, Krishna is the source, he is the controller, he is the best. Everything is coming from Krishna. When we understand that, we will want to engage in devotional service. And as we're hearing today, this devotional service, that is real liberation. It is not just understanding that we are spiritual. It is not just understanding that God is present within me. God is present within us. But that understanding that God is a person, Krishna is a person, and my relationship with Krishna is one of service. Dasa dasa. I am always the eternal, fragmental, tiny servant of Krishna. And my role in this life, my role for eternity is to bring Krishna pleasure. That is liberation. What do we want to be liberated from? We want to be liberated from this material. Yes? We want to be liberated from identification. As we hear today, these knots, there are knots of bondage due to ignorance. When we are born into this material world, we become by the modes of material. We become bound up by ignorance, full of desire that we've carried lifetime after lifetime. And then we come into this world and the modes of material nature overcome us. And we are bound in a way to just try to fulfill our desire. But we can become free from that. We can cut those knots of bondage by transcendental knowledge and application of devotion. By engagement in marriage community, after many, many births, we may get the opportunity to associate. And in that association, that is where we get the opportunity to be. In the association of the pure devotees, this is where we learn the process of devotion. Apply that process. Always make note of them. Srila Prabhupada uses this. He has a small quotation from a verse from the second chapter of Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada quoted the second part. So this is from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th chapter, 6th. Niruto Svanushayanam Atmana Mukti Hitvanyatarutam Svarupena Vyavasti. And this means the merging of the living entity along with his conditional living tendency with the mystic lying down of the Mahatma is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation. The second sentence is what Prabhupada quoted. Liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after he gives up the changeable growth. So this is liberation. Liberation should be a permanent situation after we give up changing gross and subtle. We become free from the bondage of having material and being bound by that, being driven by that. So this is why Prabhupada says in the purport that working in the material bodily concept of life, everyone is just working in the wrong direction. Why is it working in the wrong direction? Because simply working, thinking that I am this material and everything related to the material, we're getting further and further and further away from our pure spiritual. We're simply becoming bound by this false ego, false identification with our material. So when we work in that way, and we see this, we look around, we see in the world, people are just working under the bodily sense of self, under bodily identification. I am this body, therefore I need to bring pleasure to the body. I am this body, everyone in relation. Everyone in some relation to the body is important to me, and those who are not related to my body, it doesn't matter. So this is simply wasting our human form, which has come about as a rarity. There are so many different species, so many different forms of life. And it is a rare thing to have this human body. And then to waste it, simply identifying with the material body, shut up, tell us this is the most tragic situation when we waste our. Prabhupada says that working in the bodily concept of life is useless. And yet we put so much, and we see the world is set up in such a way, so much energy, how to improve our bodily situation, or on the more subtle level, how to improve the situation. So much. Yet all of that emphasis is finding more that tighten which one. And starting to unravel, tease open those knots. I love this example. We have these hard knots that bind us. Because when you have a very hard knot, it's very difficult to undo. It's really hard to start and get something in and poke and pull. And it's very hard to undo. If someone's expert at tying knots, it's really difficult to undo them. So the knots that keep us here in this material world are very tight. And so we need to start chipping away. And we get that opportunity through association. We get that opportunity to start untangling those knots that bind us by the mercy of the pure devotion, by reading Prabhupada's books, by chanting Hare Krishna. All of our devotional practices are just teasing open those knots of. So this is a very diamond that gives us the opportunity to become as a result of those. So I'm that we're associated. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, one comes to Krishna consciousness is very, very soft. So when we look around, we see in our association this. And to take advantage of a great soul means we hear from them. We hear from them, we inquire from them. And we can hear and inquire from devotees of any situation. Anyone who is committed in practicing devotion. We can inquire from, how long have you been practicing? What keeps you inspired? We can always find some inspiration anywhere we look. If we look around with this mentality that actually I'm surrounded, Bob says so many times, we go to like a fire that looks for the dirty behind. So for everyone who is around you, practicing Krishna consciousness, sincerity, some, so we can always inquire. The Prabhupada is so from the Brahma Bhuta Prasad Samasar the one who is transcendently sick realizes the strength and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living instant. And in that state, he is pure. So Srila Prabhupada gives a really wonderful insight. Prabhupada says, in the material concept of life, when one works for sense gratification, there is a misery. But in the absolute world, when one is engaged in pure devotion, there is no misery. The devotee in Krishna consciousness has nothing for which to commit or desire. Since God is full, a living entity who is engaged in God's service in Krishna consciousness also becomes full in himself. He is just like a river cleansed of all dirty things. Because a pure devotee has no thought other than Krishna, he is naturally always joyful. He does not lament for any material loss or aspire for gain, because he is full in the service of the Lord. He has no desire for material enjoyment, because he knows that every living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and therefore eternally serves. So this is something that we need to constantly hear. We need to constantly hear. And simply through our practice of consciousness, we will get these revelations. The mercy of the Lord, the mercy of us, and the sincerity of practice, that we will get these. And if we are struggling in this respect, how to come to this level, spiritual. Krishna says in the following verse, one can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality, only when one is in full consciousness of me. So we see the role of consciousness central. We can't understand anything. So how do we apply this love that Krishna becomes? This is what we learn under the guidance of Spirit. And no matter what our background, what our history, the mercy of the spiritual master is evidence to make all advances on the path of Krishna. There are some very nice little advances. So another mercy, one of the greatest things I find about narrative find very interesting is how he just travels around the world and instructs and liberates people all over the place. So once Narada Muni, he was traveling through a forest and he saw a small animal laying on the floor of the forest with an arrow in its side. And the animal wasn't dead, but he had been shot by an arrow from a hunter. And Narada Muni, being a naturally compassionate, what is this? Yes, people hunt, but the animal should be killed. This animal was shot in a way that it would not die instantly, die unconsciously. So Narada Muni, he moved on in the forest and he saw another same situation. Shot, but was not killed, just sucked. Narada Muni was giving comfort to the animal because he was going along with his strength. So as Narada Muni continued through the forest, he saw up ahead, behind a tree a hunter with the arrow, his bow ready, the arrow ready to shoot another animal. So Narada Muni made some noise on the path going towards the hunter, and the animal ran away. And the hunter turned to Narada Muni and said, "Why have you scared away the animal that was trying to shoot?" Narada Muni asked him gently, are these animals that I've seen in the forest, do they belong to you? Have you shot them? They are mine. I have shot them. Narada Muni asked him, why are you shooting them, but not? And the hunter, he replied to Narada that my father taught me how to hunt this way. My name is Mrigari, it means the enemy of the animal. I feel pleasure when I see that suffering. And Narada Muni, he said to me, I'd like to ask you, I very recognize Narada as a sage. And so he said, what would you like? I can give deer skins, I can give tiger skins, such. Narada Muni said, no, what I want is this. When you shoot at an animal, kill it immediately. Don't half kill the animal and let it suffer. Because by causing so much suffering, you are such a terrible life for yourself. And then he showed, by his mystic potency, he showed Magari what would happen to him in his future. He showed Magari that all of the animals that he had been hunting had now come back and were hunting him, shooting arrows at them. And Magari, in this vision that Narada was showing him, Magari could feel the fear, he could feel the pain of being shot by arrows and feel the fear of being hunted. And Narada Muni said to him, "This is the future you make yourself by your own activities." And Magari was shocked. He was so fearful. I mean, we can't even imagine this. Imagine seeing your future life based on your activities. Even if we remember, maybe some of us from a pious Indian background didn't have a horrific life before we came to Krishna consciousness. But for many of us, if we remember back and remember our simple activities, if someone was able to show us what was going to happen to you in your next life based on what you've done, so frightened. For Magari, he was so frightened. And he fell down at Narada's feet and said, save me from this. What can I do? So Narada Muni then gave him instruction, took the role of his spiritual instruction. Said the first thing you do is you break the body. And Magari, he was hesitant for a moment, but this is my livelihood. How will I eat? How will I support? And Narada said, I will make sure. And so Magari broke his body. And then Narada Muni, he instructed him to chant. And then Narada Muni actually went back to those animals and healed those animals with them. And he showed them how compassion can be. He showed them like soft. He was instantly changed. And it wasn't just that, okay, instantly he was changed, that was that. Then Magari went back to his home. He and his wife, they gave away all of their belongings and they just lived in a simple little hut. They worshipped the tulsi plant and chanted the tulsi. And Magari became such a Vaishnava. He became such a wonderful devotee that all of the people in the surrounding villages, they heard that this hunter has become a Vaishnava. And they would bring him food every day. They would even bring too much. So Magari had everything that he needed. After some time, it's described that he came back to visit. And he wanted this sage friend with him. And they both went to visit. And they were just astonished how Magari, due to the potency of devotion, standing regardless of his actions or music and so on. Lord Nityananda, whatever our background, if we simply apply ourselves to practice devotional service like others, all sinners is real liberation is there. We simply need mercy. In the end of the purport to 1855, is Bhaktivinoda. Srila Prabhupada, that attainment of the Brahma Bhuta state of freedom from material conceptions, devotional service, begins by one hearing about it. So when one hears about the Supreme Lord, automatically the Brahma Bhuta state develops and material contamination. There's a very wonderful sequence of all familiar to share. Because this hearing about the this is the foundation of it. But how is it that we get that eagerness? How do we actually develop the urge to hear? Because as we hear in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, I'll just read it in first. So this is from the second chapter of unity. So from chapter 4, from 6. So it says here that with one pointed attention, one should constantly hear about, glorify, and worship in the. So this is how do we get that? You know, when we come to Krishna consciousness, we see in this example of Madari, he had the direct darshan, spiritual, a very intense showing of his future life. What an intense Madari, and so his change was similarly very intense and very fast. So for us, we may come to devotional service. We are associating with devotees by Krishna's grace, have the association of us. Then we inquire from the church. We need to be ready to serve in order to achieve this desire, because we have so many desires within us for material enjoyment. In order to start changing those desires from desire to material enjoyment or desire for Krishna, then we need to hear. We need to develop the desire to hear. This is the first process of devotional service. So when we begin to hear, then this whole purification can begin. So in the beginning of Bhagavatam, we hear that it is by serving devotees. By serving those devotees who are completely free from all great service. And by such service, one gains the affinity for hearing the message of us. We need to develop the desire to, before we can even begin to hear. We need that desire. And we get that through serving devotees, through serving any of Krishna's. In the association of devotees, that's when we start to hear about Krishna, expert at engaging us in service by doing anything that we can, practical devotional service. We start to develop the urge to. And this is what Krishna wants to see. Shimvatam Swakata Punya Shavana Vidyam Tasma. That Sri Krishna, the personality of God, who is the Paramatma, the Super the benefactor of truthful devotee, cleanses the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his message, virtuous with property. So Krishna himself, as Paramatma in our heart, he will take care of that cleansing. He will begin to cleanse away all of those desires for material enjoyment. He is the one who starts to unravel the knot. He will do that for us. He's seated within our heart and he wants to be active. Krishna is just waiting for us, as Prabhupada says, two birds in the tree. One bird is constantly looking around at so many other things. Yes, that's the individual jiva. But when that bird turns towards the Supreme Lord seated within the heart next to him with a little interest, then the Supreme Lord becomes very active in helping, in assisting. Krishna wants us more than we want him. So he's very willing to start cleansing away all of these desires and attachments. When we develop this urge, so this eagerness to hear is one of our most important. How much do I want to hear? And if we can see in ourselves, if we can observe my desire to hear is not so strong, we can link that back to I need to serve God. I need to serve my spiritual. I need to look for opportunities to serve. In that service, that's where I get the desire. So it's very intimate. And then we okay, this is Nityam Bhakti. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, rendering of service. All that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. Having to God praise transcendental soul. is established as an irrevocable fact. Now, irrevocable fact means it cannot be taken away. Yes, it's established. So by hearing, when we develop that urge to hear through the book, I'm sure everybody's gone through this a million times. I just really, for me, I really appreciate the clarity and the simplicity of this progression that we put into a chapter. So by serving the devotee, we get the urge to. By hearing, by regular hearing, then all that these troublesome things, as the last verse said, Krishna starts to cleanse them. Now, once we are established, we really are fit in Nityam, Bhagavad said, regular, unbreakable devotional service, then all of these troublesome things. So when we examine our heart, we see so many things are still there. But Krishna will take care of that. Krishna will take care of that. He wants us to become established, firmly established in devotional service. And we do that through association with devotees, serving with devotees. Then what happens? When irrevocable loving service, when this devotional service is really strongly established, what happens? The effects of the material modes of passion and ignorance, they don't affect us anymore. Lust, desire, anger, hankering, they disappear from the heart and the devotee becomes happy. The devotee becomes established in pure goodness. Wow. That would be amazing. You know? That's such an amazing feature of Krishna. Now all of these things will disappear and then the devotee becomes completely happy, situated in devotional service. So this is what awaits us through the application of devotion. And as we hear today, a beautiful verse from Narada Muni, this is real liberation. And as Prabhupada says towards the end of the book, he says when one is attracted to the beauty of the Supreme Person, and his mind is always engaged in the work, how are we going to get that? We might come and see Krishna and we think, oh, Krishna is beautiful. But for that real deep attachment to the Lord's lotus, fixed in our practice of fixed, fixed in the application, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Bhagavatam. Then when we see the Lord, well, not only will we think Krishna is so beautiful, Krishna will reveal himself. Then everything becomes alive. Everything becomes alive for us. So when we get that, when we are attracted to them, then we no longer feel interested. Anything that doesn't help us is a very natural process. We're only still interested in those others because we're holding on. So if we can see that, if we can observe ourselves, then let's just go back to this very simple process. Okay, I need to serve the Lord. I need to hear. I need to really develop that urge to hear. Then Krishna, he will purify those things that still. Krishna is very kind. He wants us to succeed. And Srila Prabhupada has said that he will take us back to God. We simply need to apply ourselves and practice what Srila Prabhupada has said. So it's actually a very simple process. Krishna consciousness. So I'll just read the verse again today. And have some comments that you'd like to share. Feel free. After many, many births, the results of the highest is sure. One gets an opportunity to return. Then one is able to cut the knot of bondage to ignorance, which bound him because of very truth. As a result of associating with devotees, one gradually renders service to Lord Bhakti. who is transcendental, free from attachment, beyond the mind, independent of that bhakti yoga, devotional service to the bhakti, real path of liberation. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Anyone like to share their realizations or comments? Yes, Matthew. I'm sure you can answer. So how do we understand when we look around and we see that devotees? Yeah. We look around and we still see devotees suffer. Devotees experience bodily suffering, devotees experience disease, family issues, so many things are there. And we may look around and we think, oh, I'm in Krishna consciousness. Why am I suffering? And this can cause us to feel a little bit shaky. Right? Why am I suffering when Krishna's in my life? But Krishna does not say that we will not experience any material suffering. We have a material body. We have a material mind. Those things mean that we will experience suffering. However, what Krishna always says is that he will protect his devotee. And how he protects us is he protects our consciousness. The devotee may experience those sufferings, but our perception of them is different to one who's not conscious. So, say for example, I am struck down by something. As a devotee, I may still have to go to the hospital. But my consciousness, I will be able to fix it on Krishna and understand Krishna, have that understanding. This is happening to my material body, but I'm pure soul. And we have different understanding. If we look in our Shastra, we see so much suffering. Look what happened to the Pandavas. Look what happened to Sita and Rama. So much suffering. Krishna doesn't say you come to Krishna consciousness. It's like formative. That understanding means we experience it with the same symptoms, physically, our understanding. But especially when we're beginning in devotion, we may expect, oh, I've come to Krishna. Why isn't my life perfect? But actually, as we go on in the years, we'll start to thank Krishna. Thank you for this suffering because you're teaching me something. I'm learning something. That's when we can see our mentality change. I'm sure so much. Right? I mean, our role as individual listeners is to try to connect others to Krishna. In Krishna. This is actually Vrindavan. This is the role of Krishna's mother. He's always engaging others in devotional service. So in such a service as book distribution, engaging others in service. So I can't speak much about direct communion with the super soul, but in terms of working with Krishna to bring others to Krishna, you see that our role is that we're simply become with just the tiny servant. Yes, we want to see all others as servants. So not looking at others and just taking into account how they dress or how they speak back to us, but actually seeing you are Krishna's servant. Maybe you just quite. So please take a book and learn that you're. I'm sure Guru Maharaj explains very nicely in this class. You can listen again to this. Madamanga from the share. Thank you. Yes. All devotional service is very purifying. So whatever service that we have, we should try to hold on to. That's a rare gift from Krishna. Even if it is cleaning the sinks, wiping the floor, doing book distribution, cooking. Whatever service we have. Actually, when I was very new to Krishna consciousness, this was always, always emphasized. Whatever service you have, equal. Krishna just sees that you're serving. Krishna just sees that you're serving. So even if you seemingly have the most simple type of service, Krishna is seeing that just it depends on how we're serving. He doesn't just look for us. So that's always something. Sometimes it's very to try and do something that others don't really see. But like when you drive into New Russia, do you notice when the road is nice and smooth? Or do you only notice when the road has potholes? Because we have our Maramanga Prabhu here. Every time he comes, you know what his first service is? You'll see him, he arrived in New Russia, and the next day he's out on the road, filling in the potholes for Krishna. So we have these humble servants are all around us. We should always look for the glory of the devotees. To the Prabhupada, and then Toti Vaishnava.